So how do we get this fancy in-world text that is just local to game elements and not a UI overlay? Well, let me show you. The normal way that we create UI elements is by right-clicking and going UI and choosing the type of UI that we want. And when we do so, we see this massive kind of wall up here to the side of our game. That is the editing space for what we eventually will see as overlaying our game itself with buttons or score or health, whatever it is that we want to overlay like that. But here, what we have is a local world-based UI component that is kind of a part of the game world rather than an overlay in front of it. Here's how I make it. Now, of course, you could always peek in the NPC to see how this works, but let's make one for our player just to kind of see this process. So I'm going to select my player and right click, and I'm going to add a UI element underneath them. In this case, I'm going to add text again, but you could play with some other ones as well, although it might not make a ton of sense to put buttons floating above players. That could be a very interesting game mechanic, but maybe images would make sense. For sure, text. The built-in text tool in Unity is simple and useful, but Text Mesh Pro gives us a lot more ability to customize and tweak things. I highly recommend you use it instead. The first time you click this, it might ask you to import. Just import all the things it says, and it'll work properly. I already have it imported, so I'm just going to click on Text Mesh Pro, and we'll see that it adds two things, a canvas layer and then a child to it called text. This canvas is required. It's what the text is written to. But now I see if I double click on my canvas, I'm once again presented with this massive wall that looks like it wants to be kind of that screen overlay UI, not what it is that we're wanting for this. If I jump back into the player, into the player itself, I'll see that this canvas wall is up over there, way too big and nasty. We got to fix that. The first thing that we do is with canvas selected, we come over to our canvas component, and under render mode, we're going to switch this to world space. Before I click it, I want you to notice that my transform is grayed out when it's the overlay. It's just overlaying my screen. I can't edit any of this. It just fits over my screen, whatever size it is. When I choose world space, however, that becomes unlocked. Also, for now, ignore these other settings down here. If we have multiple cameras, we might want to set the event camera for this text to be a specific one, but we're just using one camera right now, so keep it as world space. Now this means that this text is not overlaying in front of the screen. It's actually an object inside of the world itself. So you see, I don't see that text overlaid, but it's way too big and off to the side. So what can I do now? Well, I have this width and height that are crazy big. What if I shrank these down? And I also change the position to be kind of centered at the origin. Let's bring this text to where we're at. Okay, not too bad. So I have this new text. It's still way too big, but at least I've got it a little bit closer. What's left to change is the scale. I could play around with these numbers here. My preferred way to do this is to actually just use the scale tool. You can choose whichever one you want. So I'm going to choose my scaler and just click on the middle and drag it down. And zoom in and drag it down, just like any other game object to the size that I want. Then I'm going to shift it up, maybe over to the side a little bit, and maybe scale it a little bit lower and position this above my player wherever I want it. So I have this text now floating above that player. That's the size that I like. I'm not too worried about the numbers right now. I could also consider at this point now customizing the text. Maybe I'll just say player for now. And now I notice with this, player, I'm going to shift it over so it's nice and centered. And I could adjust all sorts of different settings. The color, I could adjust the italicizedness, the font, everything that's kind of more intuitive here I can play around with. All I needed to do in this tutorial was just get this set up. Now, you will see this obnoxious T floating above it when you don't have it clicked on saying there's a text element here. You actually are able to hide it showing that information by deselecting, I think, where is it in this list here? The Text Mesh Pro GUI stuff. It should be hiding right now. Why it isn't. Oh, text info. Which one is it? It's one of these. Anyway, you can play around with it if it really bugs you. Huh, it usually works. Forget it some other time. So I have this now in my world as an object. And if I run my game, now the one awkward thing here is that it moves relative to my ball, so the player rolls, which is kind of fun. But there you go. That's how you get an object floating above a player like that. And of course, if you wanted to change any of its components, well, you can connect a script to this game object and then change the text or the properties like you do anything else, or do a get component search for a text type object in the script, lots of ways to change this information. The sky's the limit what you do with it. But that's how I got that text element up and running over this animated NPC.